The files weren't missing. The evidence wasn't lost. Everything sat exactly where it should have, unchanged, untouched, intact. But without a lead, nothing moved. No one in her circle had motive or means. The scene showed no signs of forced entry, no signs of long-term planning. Leads were followed. Tips were checked. Standard procedure ruled out the obvious suspects quickly, and without evidence to pursue anyone else, the case stalled. The forensic work had reached its limit. The profile they developed didn't match anyone in the system, and without a name, there was nothing else to build on. Over time, detectives turned their attention to newer cases. The file remained active in theory, but it was no longer under review. Nothing had been overlooked. They believed only exhausted. No leads, no witnesses, no matches. For a long time, that was the working conclusion. There was one part of the file that kept being copied forward. It wasn't a theory. It wasn't a lead. It was biological material recovered during the autopsy. Documented, stored, preserved. The profile was complete, but it had nowhere to go. Every time the database was updated, the sample was checked again. And every time, the result was the same. No match. There was no name to assign to it. No local suspect. No person with a record. But the sample was stable. It met the highest standards for evidence handling at the time. The notation in the file didn't change. Same result, same silence, until the technology finally did. If you're following along, this is where we turn to what happened to Christy Mirack. The victim was Christy Mirack, 25 years old. She taught 6th grade at Rohrstown Elementary School in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. On Monday, the 21st of December, 1992, she did not report for work. The principal, Harry Goodman, became concerned after several unanswered phone calls. He drove to her townhouse at 7:45 a.m., located on Schoolhouse Lane in East Lampeter Township. The front door was slightly ajar. Inside, he found her body. Emergency responders were called, but she was declared dead at the scene. Mirack was found lying on her back, positioned near the entrance. Her coat and gloves were still on, indicating she had been preparing to leave for work. There were signs of a violent struggle in multiple areas of the home. A wooden cutting board, cracked and blood-stained, was located near her body. The autopsy confirmed she had been beaten, sexually assaulted, and strangled. Her jaw was fractured. Investigators noted ligature marks consistent with fabric, later determined to be a portion of her own sweater. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. There was no indication that the home had been ransacked for valuables. This narrowed the scope of the initial inquiry. Detectives focused on known acquaintances, professional contacts, and any prior personal associations. Mirack had no active disputes at school. Her employer described her as punctual and engaged. According to interviews conducted in the days that followed, she had spoken to at least 2 people on the phone that morning before leaving for work. Those conversations, one of which occurred around 7 a.m., did not raise concern. Investigators looked at her social contacts. A man she had recently been dating was interviewed. He was married, and the relationship was not widely known. He brought flowers to the school the morning after her death, unaware she had been killed. Police confirmed his alibi and eliminated him as a suspect. Other men she had been in contact with were also questioned and excluded. Her family reported no known threats or recent conflict. Her neighbors recalled nothing unusual in the days prior. A few described seeing a white or light-colored vehicle with rear window louvers near her home, parked close to the time of the attack. The vehicle was never identified. The Pennsylvania State Police conducted the forensic processing. Biological evidence was recovered from the scene and from Mirack's body. A semen sample was submitted for DNA testing. The profile obtained was consistent and complete, and by early 1993, it was entered into the National CODIS system. No match was returned. The profile did not correspond to any known offender or existing entry in law enforcement databases. That result held for the duration of the initial investigation. Without a match or viable suspect, the case narrowed. Police developed no clear motive. There were no signs of prolonged surveillance or forced entry, and no claims of stalking had been filed. The victim's routine was consistent. She left for work around the same time each weekday. Investigators considered the possibility that the perpetrator had known her schedule, but found no evidence to confirm that. No eyewitness placed anyone entering or exiting the townhouse that morning. The timing of the attack, estimated between 7 and 7:45 a.m., was unusually short. It suggested a deliberate entry and immediate violence. Over time, the case file grew, but offered no resolution. The DNA sample remained available for periodic comparison. As new names surfaced through minor tips or routine checks, detectives compared them to the stored profile. No matches were found. By the early 2000s, the investigation was categorized as cold. The case was retained within East Lampeter Township Police but not assigned for regular review. Mirack's family continued to request updates. Her brother, Vince Mirack, posted a billboard in 2007 appealing for information. The school where she had worked maintained a small memorial. Her parents passed away without seeing the case resolved. Law enforcement issued public reminders around anniversaries. Each year, the DNA profile was checked against new database entries. The forensic record from the original autopsy remained intact. The sample quality was high. Chain of custody procedures had been followed, and the physical evidence was stored under proper conditions. No degradation was reported. In 2015, the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office formally assumed control of the investigation. Assistant District Attorney Christine Wilson was assigned to review the case from the beginning. A dedicated team of detectives was assembled to re-examine the file. They started with the existing evidence. The preserved DNA profile, still unmatched, was selected as the primary focus. Investigators began with the scene itself. The door was slightly open when the principal arrived, but there was no damage to the frame or lock. No broken glass. No signs of forced entry. That detail shaped the early assumptions. Detectives believed the killer may have entered either with a key, through an unlocked door, or by quickly overpowering her during departure. There was no indication she had time to react defensively once the attack began. Crime scene processing was conducted by the Pennsylvania State Police. Photographs, measurements, and biological samples were taken. Blood and semen were recovered from the body and surrounding area. A partial footprint was noted but not identifiable. The cutting board, found cracked near the victim's head, was collected as a potential weapon. The coroner later confirmed blunt force trauma consistent with an object of that shape. By the end of that week, investigators had conducted more than 24 interviews. Co-workers, friends, neighbors, and prior acquaintances were contacted. All reported the same thing. Christy Mirack followed a fixed routine. She left for work around the same time each morning, taught 6th grade, and returned home by late afternoon. There were no reports of recent threats. Her family told detectives she had no outstanding disputes or ongoing arguments. They described her as independent and busy, but not fearful. 2 lines of inquiry emerged. The first was interpersonal. A few men had known her socially. One had dated her secretly while separated from his wife. That man voluntarily came forward, unaware at the time of her death. He was cleared by both witness statements and physical evidence. Other names were checked and eliminated the same way. The second line was environmental. A small number of neighbors had noticed a white or light-colored vehicle parked along the street around 7 a.m. the morning she was killed. One noted louvered rear windows. The description matched a broad category of late 1980 seconds, sports coupes, but nothing conclusive. No license plate was noted. No one saw anyone enter or exit the vehicle. Police considered the possibility of a stranger attack, but there was no evidence of surveillance equipment, voyeurism complaints, or forced entry. There was also no known history of similar assaults in the area. Nothing about the scene suggested a staged robbery or opportunistic break-in. By mid-January 1993, the working theory remained broad. The killer may have known the victim's routine but was not necessarily known to her. The absence of any obvious motive or link made the case harder to narrow. The forensic work continued. Vaginal swabs yielded male DNA. A full profile was generated and submitted to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. The profile met threshold requirements. It was not degraded, partial, or mixed. It was entered as an unknown offender. There were no hits, no matches in the local, state, or federal offender registries. That result would remain unchanged for more than 2 decades. As years passed, the case was revisited at intervals. Whenever a new name surfaced, whether from community tips, new arrests, or unrelated investigations, the profile was compared. None matched. The DNA remained usable, but unconnected. There were no witnesses, no recovered fingerprints that could be linked to a suspect, no usable surveillance footage from the time. The evidence, while biologically strong, was structurally isolated. The lead agency, East Lancaster Township Police, maintained the file. Detectives assigned to other cases continued to check the Mirack evidence when time permitted. In 2007, the victim's brother paid for a billboard, urging the public to come forward. No new information emerged. Around the same time, forensic technology had begun to shift. Capabilities expanded, but databases still required a suspect's profile to generate a hit. Without a known individual to compare, the stored DNA had no new utility. By 2010, the case was informally categorized as cold. There was no formal closure. The file was not archived, but it was not under active investigation. The last major investigative lead had been nearly 15 years earlier. The sample remained in the system. It continued to return the same result: profile complete, no match. That changed in 2015. The Lancaster County District Attorney's Office took direct oversight of the investigation. This was not a referral, it was a reassignment. ADA Christine Wilson led the new review. A county detective was assigned full-time to the file. Their approach began not with new evidence but with a new reading of the old file. Every report, interview, photograph, and lab submission from 1992 through 2014 was re-examined. The preserved DNA profile was central. It had always been central. What changed was the emergence of technology that could extract more information from it, even without a match. The profile was clean. The question was, what could now be learned from it without knowing the name? In early 2017, investigators contacted Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based firm developing forensic tools based on SNP-level genetic data. The technology was still considered experimental by many agencies. It did not identify suspects. What it could do was predict ancestry, eye color, skin tone, and other visual traits based on a person's genome. Parabon offered phenotype reports, and more recently, composite facial approximations. In March 2017, Lancaster County submitted the DNA from the Mirack case. The source was a carpet stain consistent with the original biological material recovered. The lab confirmed the sample was viable for phenotype sequencing. Over the next several months, Parabon conducted the analysis. By November 2017, a report and facial approximation were delivered. The image depicted a light-skinned male with brown or hazel eyes and dark hair. It was generated across 3 approximate age ranges, 25, 45, and 55, since the suspect's age was unknown. The report included probable biogeographic ancestry and predicted likelihood of certain facial features. This was the first time the Mirack case had a visual lead generated not from witness memory, but from the suspect's DNA. The image was released to the public through official channels. A dedicated website was created to display the sketches. Local media ran the story. Over the next several months, the DA's office received dozens of tips. Some named individuals. Most were speculative. Each was checked. Each was cleared. No visual identification led to a match. But the exercise was not considered a failure. For the first time in 25 years, the public had a frame of reference, and the investigative team had exhausted all traditional tools. The profile remained in storage. It had been used for conventional comparison. It had been used for phenotype analysis. One tool remained untried, emerging, controversial, and untested in court. The case was ready for it. By early 2018, the preserved DNA sample from the Mirack case had been examined with every available traditional method. It had been entered into CODIS, retested with upgraded lab systems, and used for phenotype prediction. None of those approaches could generate a name. What remained was a method still unfamiliar to most law enforcement agencies at the time: forensic genetic genealogy. This method did not rely on law enforcement databases. It did not require the suspect to have a prior conviction or even a traffic ticket. Instead, it used consumer-level DNA data, uploaded voluntarily by individuals seeking to explore ancestry or family history. By comparing unknown crime scene DNA to profiles in open-source databases, genealogists could identify distant biological relatives of the suspect. From there, they could reconstruct family trees, narrow down possibilities based on age, geography, and other factors, and ultimately produce a list of viable candidates. Lancaster County authorities contacted Parabon Nanolabs to begin this process. At the time, Parabon was among the few private laboratories equipped to perform both SNP-level DNA processing and genealogical reconstruction. The company assigned C.C. Moore, a genetic genealogist with experience in adoption cases and unidentified remains, to the Mirack file. The initial step required reprocessing the crime scene DNA. Traditional STR analysis used in CODIS systems evaluates fewer than 24 genetic markers. For genealogy, a much denser dataset was required. Hundreds of thousands of SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, spread across the genome. These SNPs reflect inherited traits and shared ancestry. A new DNA extract was submitted for sequencing, and a compatible genotype file was produced. That data file was uploaded to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database originally created for hobbyists. GEDmatch allows users to compare DNA against other uploaded profiles to find biological matches, often at the level of second, third, or fourth cousins. For law enforcement use, the database required explicit terms of service compliance, and at the time, it allowed searches by approved agencies investigating violent crimes. Once uploaded, the crime scene profile produced a list of genetic matches. None were immediate family members. No siblings. No first cousins. But a group of distant relatives, most in the range of third or fourth cousins, shared measurable segments of DNA with the unknown subject. Each match included a list of shared centimorgans. cm, a unit used to indicate the amount of genetic material inherited from a common ancestor. The matches were statistically valid, but genealogically complex. On their own, they could not name a suspect. They could, however, help locate the broader family tree. Moore began with those matches and worked backwards. Using public records, family history websites, and vital statistics, she identified the common ancestors among the listed matches. Most of them traced back to families in Pennsylvania or Puerto Rico. Based on overlapping trees, she determined that the suspect likely descended from a union between a Puerto Rican paternal line and a Caucasian maternal line, both with ties to Lancaster County. The process then moved forward in time. By tracking the children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of the identified ancestors, Moore assembled a list of living individuals who matched the geographic and ancestral profile. Among them was a man named Raymond Rowe. Rowe was born in 1970 and had lived in Lancaster since adolescence. He worked as a disc jockey under the name DJ Freeze and was well known locally for performing at weddings, school dances, and public events. His name had never appeared in the original Mirack case file. He had no criminal record beyond a summary offense unrelated to violence. But on paper, he matched the profile. The right age, the right heritage, and a known presence in Lancaster. In the early 1990 seconds. At this stage, the genealogy process paused. The method had narrowed the search, but no legal conclusion could be drawn from family tree analysis alone. Law enforcement now needed to confirm whether Rowe's DNA was identical to the crime scene sample. To do this, they planned a covert collection. Investigators observed Rowe at a public event, a school function where he was performing as a DJ. When he left the building, they retrieved a water bottle and chewing gum he had discarded. These items were submitted to the Pennsylvania State Police Lab for comparison. Analysts extracted DNA from the saliva and processed it using STR profiling, the same standard used in the original 1992 sample. The result was conclusive. The profile from Rowe's discarded items matched the semen sample obtained from Christy Mirack's body. It also matched the stain collected from her carpet during the original investigation. The probability of the DNA belonging to anyone else was functionally zero. This confirmed that Raymond Rowe was the source of the biological evidence. Once this result was reported, investigators proceeded with the legal phase of the case. Warrants were issued, and Rowe was taken into custody on the 25th of June 2018. At the time of arrest, he did not contest the match. A formal charge of criminal homicide was filed in Lancaster County. From the genealogy upload to the arrest, the process had taken just over 6 weeks. The technology itself had existed for less than 5 years. It had only recently been used in the arrest of the Golden State Killer in California, and Mirack's case became one of the first in the country to move from arrest to conviction using this method. Rowe's DNA was tested again under court supervision. The match held. He later entered a guilty plea, admitting to the crime in open court. No additional explanation was given. The genealogy work was not challenged during proceedings. No claim of error was made regarding the DNA collection, family tree analysis, or laboratory processing. The method used to identify Rowe has since been replicated in dozens of cold cases. At the time, it represented the intersection of biological science, open-source data, and investigative process. It did not depend on witness memory. It did not require confession or surveillance. It depended on a stable sample, careful record-keeping, and a tool set that had not existed when the crime was first investigated. In Christy Mirack's case, the method did not supplement the investigation. It solved it. The match report was reviewed line by line. The genetic markers from the water bottle and chewing gum matched the sample preserved since 1992. There was no discrepancy, no statistical ambiguity. Analysts confirmed the profiles were identical. Investigators already knew the suspect's name from the genealogy work. Now they had confirmation from direct comparison. The chain of custody was intact. The profile from the crime scene, generated from evidence collected during autopsy, had remained viable for more than 2 decades. When tested against Rowe's discarded items, it produced a full match across all loci used in standard forensic identification. The identification did not confirm a relationship. It did not explain a motive, but it placed Raymond Rowe at the scene. At the time, in the context of a sexual assault and homicide, there had never been a second profile. No mixture, no conflicting trace. The evidence had always pointed to one source. Until that point, it had no name. Now it did. Raymond Rowe was arrested on the 25th of June 2018. He was charged with criminal homicide, rape, and related offenses in connection with the 1992 death of Christy Mirack. The charges were filed by the Lancaster County District Attorney's Office. Rowe did not resist arrest and did not initially speak to investigators. The case proceeded through preliminary hearings without contest. Forensic reports were entered into the record. Prosecutors confirmed that Rowe's DNA matched the biological evidence recovered during the original investigation. No suppression motion was filed. There was no trial. On the 8th of January 2019, Rowe pleaded guilty in Lancaster County Court to all charges. He did not offer an explanation. As part of the plea agreement, the prosecution withdrew its notice of intent to seek the death penalty. Rowe was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 60 to 120 additional years for sexual assault and related counts. The sentence was issued by Judge David Ashworth. No appeal was filed at the time of conviction. Roe remains in custody under the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. The conviction stands. The case is closed. The evidence didn't change. It was collected, processed, and stored according to the standards of its time. What changed was the set of tools available to interpret it. Each prior method had reached its limit. Each advance in technology revealed a new possibility, but never a conclusion until the framework for genealogical comparison made it possible to move from information to identification. It was not the volume of new evidence that shifted the case. It was the willingness to return to what had already been done, and to look at it with new capacity. What solved the case wasn't chance. It was continuity. If you followed this story to the end, you can let us know where you're listening from. And if cases like this interest you, you're welcome to like, comment, and subscribe.